right, Esther chapter number 5. We will read down through the first 12 verses here. So Esther chapter number 5, we'll begin reading in verse number 1. Here God's word says, "Now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be given, or it shall be even given thee to the half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, If it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, Cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king has said. Then went Haman forth that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself. And when he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh his wife. And Haman told of them the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he advanced him above all the princes and servants of the king. Haman said, moreover, Yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared, but myself. And tomorrow I am invited unto her also with the king. Today we are going to talk about the favor of God. The favor of God. Let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, I want to thank you so much for the opportunity you've given us again to study your word. Lord, as we look through again the story of Esther, and Lord, just watching how you worked behind the scenes and everything that took place, Lord, help us to trust you more. Help us to exercise more faith in you. And Lord, help us to lift things up to you in prayer. Lord, draw us closer to you. We'll pray it in your Son's precious name. Amen. All right. Have you ever made a decision that was something that drastically changed your life? Whether it was marriage or a career, whether it was having children. I think that's the number one thing. Having children drastically changes your life. Adam's life drastically changed when he ate the fruit in the garden, right? Noah's life drastically changed when he built a big boat that nobody had ever seen need of before because it had never rained before. His life changed drastically. You think about David, and when he sinned with Bathsheba, his life changed drastically. And I mean, a lot of those are negative things, that they weren't necessarily good things, but think about how one decision, one change could make such a drastic difference in somebody's life. Esther obeyed God and saved her people. Just this little change in her life, and it saved the people, the Jewish people. So at the end of chapter 4, we had kind of left Haman at a point where he had convinced the king, there's this people that live in your kingdom that, they're just bad people. And they have their own laws, and their laws are contrary to your laws. And you know what, we just don't like them, so we should just off all of those people. Never names the people group in any of the decisions he's making. And so says, this is what we need to do. And the king says, you know what, that's a pretty good idea. yeah, that's a good idea. Let's go ahead and let's just get rid of those people because we don't need them anymore. And so he signs off on everything, and I still can't help but picture this. He gives Haman the ring to stamp all of the letters that would be sent out, and it's kind of a silly thought, but every time I think about it, I don't think about Haman where the point where he's got the king's ring and he's just very carefully stamping every one. No, this guy was so full of pride that he had to have taken that ring and just put it on his hand, and he stamped every one of those with just full of pride and obviously not good pride, but he thought he was doing something good. He's like, yeah, stamping every one of these letters, and it's just, man, this is so good. Well, when Mordecai comes back on and tells Esther of everything that had taken place, we know he used this famous phrase from the book of Esther, for such a time as this. Have you come into the kingdom for such a time as this? Well, Esther made a courageous decision, and she decided, you know what? I'm going to follow the instruction and the guidance of her kind of father and say, you know what? Even if this costs me my life, I'm going to exercise some faith. I'm going to trust in God that he has a plan. And then they went on this 3-day fast as they began praying. And it brought her to this point, Esther's petition of the king, when she finally gets to talk to him. Now, by law, she was prohibited from approaching. She was not allowed to just go in unto the king and say like, hey, how's it going? You got a question you need to ask here in town. You need to talk to somebody at the city staff. You can just go open the door to the office, walk in, and there's going to be people sitting in there. And you can be like, oh, hey, I need to talk to so-and-so, or I need to talk to this person. And it's like, oh, yeah, just a second. Well, it should be, hey, just a second, let me go grab somebody. But that's not how it was with the king. You could not just go in and see the king. You had to be summoned to come see the king. And so as Mordecai is talking to her about this, she's like, I haven't been summoned in 30 days. It's been 30 days since he's asked me to come see him or to come talk to him. And like, I don't know, it's just a totally different ballpark because I'm like, I can't imagine not talking to my wife for 30 days. I can't imagine being like, yeah, hey, see you around, I'll call you when I want to talk to you, or I'll summon you when I want to talk to you. And so it leaves her in this predicament of, what am I going to do? What is going to take place? But Esther, she knew something that I think not everybody understood. Not everybody knew. Though she had not been summoned before the king, she knew exactly who she could go talk to. Proverbs 21:1 says, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. As the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. Access to this earthly king was very limited. She was not supposed to just go in because under penalty of death, she could be turned away. But access to her heavenly king, it was open. She could go talk to him and she could pray, and so that's what she did. She prayerfully approached this problem. So she began requesting all of the Jews in Shushan, can you all start praying? Can you all start fasting? We're going to spend 3 days praying. We're not going to drink anything. We're not going to eat anything. We're going to spend 3 days fasting and praying that God would open the door and allow this conversation to take place. If you're in chapter 5, you can look back just a couple verses at chapter 4. In verse number 16, it says, Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so I will go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. I think it's very interesting to see that the predetermination that she had right there. She said, we're going to pray for 3 days and for 3 nights. We're going to fast, and then I will go to the king. She had already determined. The 3 days wasn't for her trying to decide, should I go talk to the king? She had already decided, I'm going to go try. I'm going to have faith that God can do this. And if I perish, I perish. If God would have that to happen, okay. Well, it's just cool to see the trust that she had, because I can't imagine what took place over those 3 days. As they were praying, as they were fasting, I imagine there was a lot of quietness taking place. I imagine there's a lot of solemnness taking place as people are just praying and begging God, Lord, let her go and talk to the king. Let him, extend the scepter to her so that she doesn't get killed. Allow her to go in and have favor with the king. Not just that she would be able to go in and talk to him. That's a huge deal. I mean, if you don't get to go in and go talk to him, you don't even get to ask the question of, please don't kill my people. But give her favor with the king. Proverbs 16:1 says, the preparations of the heart in man and the answer of the tongue is in the Lord. And then verse 3 says, commit thy works unto the Lord, and thy thoughts shall be established. She had already determined exactly what she was going to do, and then she just spent time praying, asking God, Lord, give me the petition of my heart. Allow this to take place. And, often difficult times are the catalyst for us to go to prayer, right? You enter a hard time, and it seems like that's the difficult thing that catapults us into the point of thinking that, well, maybe I should pray now. I have a friend that used this phrase several weeks ago, and he said, worry should be the check engine light for your prayer life. And I'm like, wow, that's because what happens when we worry? We're like, oh man, I'm worried about something. Well, we should be going to talk to God. We should be going to tell him and to talk to him because he's the one that can answer it. He's the one that can take care of it. And Esther knew that. Esther knew, I can talk to God. I can intercede on behalf of the situation. I can pray for myself that, Lord, I'd really rather not have to die, so can you open the doors for this? There's a couple of quotes for you. D.L. Moody said, some people think God does not like to be troubled with our constant coming and asking. The way to trouble God is to not come at all. I've talked to my kids before, and I'm like, I don't want you to not come to me to ask a question. I don't want you to not come and make a request or ask me about something. To not ask is way worse. Have you ever heard that phrase? It's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. That's not true with God. God wants you to just come and talk to him and come and ask him. Here's another one for you. If Christians spend as much time praying as grumbling, they would soon have nothing to grumble about. Esther recognized that the only way that any of them, were going to make it through this was through prayer. Prayer was the one thing that was going to lead them into everything else that takes place. God, I need you to move. If you've ever heard the phrase before, prayer moves the hand of God. He wants us to come to him and to pray, and she knew that. She knew she needed to enter into this prayerful time to ask God for this position. But she also did it with deferential. After 3 days of prayer and fasting, Esther used great wisdom and deference in her uninvited appearance to the king. She had not been called, she had not been invited, and so even in doing so, she didn't just show up like willy-nilly, like, hey, king, I need to talk to you. She displayed a lot of wisdom in the decisions that she made. One of them came to the fact that it says that she put on her royal apparel. When she showed up to talk to the king, it was kind of in honor of the fact that she's going into his presence. She's like, I'm going to go talk to the king, and I'm going to make sure that I'm dressed accordingly to honor him. It says in verse number 1, now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel. I don't know exactly what this would have been, but knowing some other things from Scripture, I imagine it was something maybe purple and gold in color. I mean, vibrant colors that reflected royalty. And I look at that, I'm like, man, she was preparing herself to be in the presence of the king. I really liked this quote by Warren Wiersbe. It says, Esther prepared herself to meet the king. If you knew you were going to meet the President of the United States at the White House, you would prepare for the meeting. And just to have some wisdom in what she was doing, she didn't just show up and whatever. She put on her royal clothes to bring honor to the king, and the fact that she's respecting him, she's going to be in his courtroom, if you'd put it that way. She's going to be in his presence, and like, I'm going to honor him as I come to him. But I just think of what a great image this is of her prayers being answered, of her faith in God. As she puts all of this together, it's like, I'm planning to talk to him. Even like, we're going to read down through some other things. She had made plans. She had made preparations that when she went to go to talk to the king, it wasn't like well, I hope I get in. Even though she was hoping that, she had already made other plans. She had made plans for God answering. She put footsteps to her faith, waiting for God to give the answer. Look at the end of verse number 1. It says, she came in and stood in the inner court of the king's house over against the king's house. The most important thing, other than her physical appearance when she came before the king, was her demeanor. She didn't come and barge into the king's room, the king's palace or wherever they were at. She didn't come barging in. And all I can think of is this timid, lady full of humility that just waiting there. Just standing where she could be seen, like I'm here to talk to the king. But she wasn't making a big fuss about it. She was just waiting for him. And God gives her favor with that. Today, that's not what you see, right? If somebody wants to be heard today, what do? They yell and they protest and they argue and they burn buildings down and do stupid things. And that's their thought of, this is how I'm going to get heard. And I tell you what, I've heard a lot more important things from people that just stood there quietly and just waited for their opportunity to speak and said profound things or said, very encouraging things and so I look at her attitude as she just shows up and she's just there in this attitude of humility, like, I'm here to talk to the king. Yes, I'm the queen, but he is the king. And just the attitude reflects through there. She had the potential of death standing there, and I have no doubt that was on her mind. As she thought about that, like, I could, if he doesn't extend that scepter, I could die. Right now on the spot, he could have one of his military guys come over and like, she's not supposed to be here. I didn't invite her to be here. Off with her head, And it doesn't seem that far-fetched, does it? Looking at who Ahasuerus is, he got so upset at Vashti for not coming to see him when he told her that he made this big, huge law to make sure that all wives are submitting to all husbands throughout the entire kingdom of the Medes and the Persians, and he was really ticked off about it. So I can understand that Esther she's probably a little concerned. She's probably a little worried as she stood there and just waited for God to answer. And God answered and said, you know what? I'm going to let you be favored. I'm going to let you be favored. I think it's interesting that the king didn't really have to think about it. You don't see a moment where it's like, well, he's having this conversation with somebody, and he happens to see Esther standing over there, and he says, you know what, I'm busy, Esther. I'm trying to talk to this people over here, and maybe he's got some dignitary in there or something. It's like, no. He saw Esther and was immediately willing to display favor to her. Look at verse 2. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. It was immediate. He saw her standing there in I don't know if it was, elegance and grace or just an attitude of humility, but his heart was moved to immediately show favor. And I kind of feel like we're seeing a different king than who we saw with Vashti. Like Ahasuerus is just like, oh, Esther, yeah, come on in. Like come over here and talk to me. It's almost like it doesn't matter what he was dealing with before. I don't know if there's foreign dignitaries that he's dealing with some peace agreement or something, and he's like, no, you guys hold on. Esther, come on up here. Come talk to me. And I think it's just awesome to see that God moved through it, and it kind of ties back into that verse in Proverbs 21:1. The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. God was the one that was moving everything, and I think it just continually amazes me to look at the book of Esther, that God's not mentioned anywhere in it. But you see his fingerprints everywhere. You see everything that he's doing and working in the background, even to the point where he just gives Esther favor so that she doesn't lose her head, but also brings her in a great attitude. And he's thrilled that she's there. And I just think it's really, really cool that he brings this attitude out of the king, this official invitation. Esther, come on in, raises the scepter out to her, like, come on. Look at the second half of verse number 2. It says, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, what wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be given thee to the half of the kingdom. What do you think was going on in Esther's mind? Obviously standing out there, and she's like, I could die any moment here if the king is upset with me. But then to like it almost seems in just such rapid succession. Come on in, Esther. Oh yeah, here, I'm going to extend the golden scepter. Here's a formal invitation for you to come in here. What can I do for you? Oh, what can I do for you? Up to half of the kingdom. Like, wow, like God's answering prayers. And like, I wonder what is going on in her mind as she thinks of this. She had a request that she wanted to give, but then the king goes above and beyond and just gives this lavish offer of, what can I do for you? Up to half of the kingdom. Think about that level of favor. I mean, that's impressive. Can you go and imagine talking to the President of the United States at any point in time and saying, hey, I really, really need you to do this, and it's going to cost us, I don't know, somewhere around $10 billion. It's like, oh yeah, up to half of the kingdom. Go ahead, whatever you need to do. I hope that doesn't happen, but for this situation, the sky was the limit. The king said, yeah, whatever you need, whatever you want, we'll take care of it. We'll figure it out. But notice she doesn't immediately make her request, right? The actual request, the whole reason that Mordecai wanted her to pray over this and everything, she doesn't mention it yet. We won't even get to it today where she mentions it. Her first request was, well, could I have you and Haman come to this banquet? Notice that I've already prepared. She was already preparing this banquet. And so it brings Esther into this plot regarding Haman. Now, I can't help it. Every time I get to Haman, I'm just like, you're such a dirtbag. But Esther responded in kindness. She didn't display this attitude of like, Haman, you scum. Like, how dare you write these letters that you're going to kill my people? No, you still see that attitude of humility as she's just waiting. All right, God, you're going to bring these things forth. And I wonder if that didn't take place during those days that she was sitting there praying, that God gave her the ideas of this is what I want you to do. This is the path that I want you to go down leading up to Haman's demise. These are the things that you should do. And so right off the bat, she's like, I would like to invite you guys to this meal. And so she requests Haman to a banquet. Look at verse number 4. And Esther answered, if it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. It again amazes me when people, I've been pretty transparent about this before, it's very easy for me in my walk with the Lord to pick up my Bible and read it and spend time with God that way. Like, it's so easy for me to do. I love picking up my Bible and reading it. Prayer is a whole other thing. Prayer is a very difficult avenue, I think, for a lot of people. But some people, it's like they come into it and they pray and it seems great. And I look at this, I'm like, she had such faith in the prayer that she had made that she'd already prepared the banquet. I mean, as I just think of her standing there waiting to be summoned in to see the king, and it's like wherever she was having this banquet, they're already working on it. They've already got their food going on, they're setting out plates, they're making sure everything looks really nice, and like all of this is going on in the background while Esther is waiting to talk to the king. She had already planned this out and had enough faith to say, all right, God, I'm going to stand here, and if I perish, I perish. But if you answer my request, I've already made preparations for you to answer. God wants us to act that same way. When we come to him with a request, are you prepared for the answer? I think about the old story of a farmer that was really, really concerned about how dry it was, and he's just like, man, I should just, I'm not sure what to do. I don't know that we can plant because we're not going to get any rain. It's been so dry. And so then he's just like praying and asking the Lord for rain. And somebody asks him, well, if you're asking the Lord for it to rain, shouldn't you put in the seed in the ground expecting him to answer? And how many times do we not live our life that way? That we go to God and we ask things of him, but we don't prepare to receive the answer. That's what Esther was doing. She prepared to receive the answer. And what does she do next? She requests another banquet. Oh, by the way, after we're done with this banquet, it'd be really nice if we could invite you guys to come to another banquet tomorrow. I mean, remember, they're so wealthy in this kingdom, they had a party for 6 months before Vashti got in trouble, in the very beginning. So it was like For them to have 2 banquets 2 days in a row, probably not a big deal. But Esther says, I want to invite you to a second banquet. Look at verse 5. It says, when the king said, cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition? And what is thy request? Even to half of the kingdom. Notice, he's repeating himself now. It hasn't changed. Unto half the kingdom. What is your actual request? Because as of now, all you've done is ask me to have lunch with you. So, what is this request? Then answered Esther and said, my petition and my request is, if I have found favor in thy sight, or in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king hath said. And they said, she's already making these plans. I mean, it continues to amaze me. She's like, unto half the kingdom, what do you want? She didn't prematurely jump the gun. And now here's another interesting thing to think about. Okay, the banquet that they were at, there were still rules of formality, of things that they could and couldn't do, even in a banquet. Even when you're sitting there with the king, it's not like you could just talk freely and openly. The banquet that they were having, there was probably many other people that were around, other servants that were around, other people that were around, even though the request was for Haman and the king. So she asks a second banquet, but in the second banquet, she just wants it to be her and the king and Haman. That's when she's waiting to ask her actual petition. So at this point, she's like, it'd be really, really nice if you guys could come to this other banquet. And as you see in verse number 9, we'll read in a second, Haman gets super excited about this. He's super amped up at the fact that he's like, man, I'm getting invited to not just one, but 2 banquets with the queen and the king. Like, this is like, I have arrived. I'm the guy. You know, when we talked about Haman's promotion, it says that he was promoted above all of the princes in all of the provinces. He was already like the guy. He was already way up there. And so this just serves as a injection of pride to his current prideful attitude. So he's just very, very full of pride. So we see Haman's pride increases. Now, all I can see with this is Haman standing there just smiling ear to ear. Just this full, arrogant, prideful, like, man, he's just so excited. He's like, can you imagine the boasting? Guys, what are you doing tomorrow? I can't, I'm busy. I'm going to a banquet with the king and the queen. Oh, what are you doing the next day? I'm going to another banquet with the king and with the queen. Don't bother me with these peasant things. You know, I was like, I don't know. I just feel the arrogance exuding out of this guy. He's just so high on himself that he's like, nothing can touch him. Man, I just keep getting invited to these parties. I keep getting to go to these places. And that is until he saw Mordecai as he left the palace. And it's almost like he's this, you know, this big balloon full of pride. And as soon as he sees Mordecai, there went all of it. He's like, Mordecai will still not bow down to me. Mordecai still will not show any respect to me. He still is this just, and he's so upset about it. Look at verse number 9. Then went Haman forth that day joyful with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up, nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. His anger and hatred it's not something that he was hiding. It's not something that he was secretly bitter about. He was pretty openly upset with everything that was taking place with Mordecai. He's like, how dare this guy not show me more respect? How dare this guy not be more appreciative to who I am, because I am this person that the king has placed in power, and you ought to respect me. And Mordecai's like, you're not God, and I ain't bowing down to you. It's not going to happen. You know, I'm sure Mordecai, you know, knew all of this, but it makes me think of today. There are people that hate Christians just because they're Christians. There are people that are just full of pride and anger, and I look at Mordecai, even in all of this taking place, Mordecai still stood strong in his faith with the Lord. He didn't waver. We don't have anything anywhere where he wavered in his faith for God. He was trusting in God that God was going to answer. He even told Esther, Maybe God brought you to the kingdom for such a time as this, but if you don't do what God has asked you to do, then he's going to raise up somebody else, and he's going to answer by somebody else, and your family is just going to be, spit dirt in the mud or something, It's like, you have this opportunity. He had all kinds of faith, and it amazes me. Look at verse number 10. We're going to read a couple of verses here. It says, nevertheless, Haman refrained himself. When he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh his wife, and Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and the servants of the king. Haman said, moreover, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared but myself. And tomorrow am I invited unto her also with the king. What a bunch of pride. He goes back and he finds his friends and his family, and then it's like he just stands on his soapbox and just like tells them how good of a person he is and how the king has promoted him and all these things. And just like, you just feel the pride, right? You just like, I just read through it and I'm like, man, I'm sick of your attitude already. Every time I come to Haman, I'm like, man, just pride everywhere he goes. He thought he was pretty special. Maybe I should even say special. He thought he was pretty hot stuff. Here's a quote from William Barclay. It says, pride is the ground in which all other sins grow and the parent from which all other sins come. There's a 5-year-old boy that came home from kindergarten beaming with pride after 2 weeks of school. He had told his grandmother, I am the smartest kid in class. I think grandma was like, oh, wow, you're the smartest kid in class. It's like, did the teacher tell you that? No, I had to tell her, but I'm the smartest kid in class. It's like pride, right? Just overflows sometimes. And Haman had to tell others how great he was. He had to take the time to tell others, I've been promoted to all these things. I'm going to all these banquets with the king and the queen, and I'm pretty hot stuff, in case you didn't know. I'm sure at this point, friends and family, I'm sure they knew that he thought that he was hot stuff. He had gotten to this position where he thought he had so much power that he could do whatever he wanted, even destroy Mordecai, because Mordecai wouldn't respect him. Mordecai wouldn't listen to him. Look at verses 13 and 14. Yet all this availeth me nothing. This is Haman talking. So long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then said Zeresh his wife and all his friends unto him, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king, that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go thou in merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. Interesting that his pride is just exuding out of him to this point where this idea comes. Go make these really tall gallows so that we can hang him in front of everybody, where everybody can see him. And Haman's like, that's a great idea. That would be so disgraceful. It would be so awesome to have Mordecai just hanging up there, dying in front of everybody. And it would make me feel better. I think Haman went to bed that night and slept like a baby. He's just like, man, I've got such a good plan. But what he didn't know is God had a plan. He was just a chess piece on God's chessboard. So God had a plan for the people. We've already watched how prayer has been given, how faith has been exercised, how obedience has been exercised. And the whole time, God's in the background orchestrating and running everything that is taking place. We're going to jump to chapter 6 now. Look at the first couple verses here. It says, on that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigtha and Teresh, 2 of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, what honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this? Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, there is nothing done for him. So the king gets a sleepless night. During this sleepless night that Mordecai had just gotten this established idea where I'm going to build these huge gallows and we're going to hang Mordecai on him, it just so happened, ironically, that he didn't get to sleep the king didn't sleep much that night. So the king, I don't know why, but the king's like, I can't sleep at all, so why don't you bring out the records of everything that's taken place and just start reading to me this history book. I don't know if he was trying to fall back asleep and just read a boring book or what, but as he's going along, they just can't sleep. And they get to this point where like, oh, and then there was these two guys, and they were going to try and kill you because they had they didn't like you. But then Mordecai warned us that they were going to try and kill you. And he's like, well, what happened? Did Mordecai get a reward? No. Remember we talked about that Mordecai this whole time has been faithful and obedient to God. He did something worthy of promotion, worthy of honor, and not a peep was said. And he said, that's okay. I did the right thing because it was the right thing to do. But now, of all of the ironic moments that it could happen, now is the time where God's like, oh, by the way, you forgot to reward Mordecai for saving your life. So, the king makes an inquiry. I cannot help but think if the king could not sleep at night and he's listening to this history book being read to him, it's probably the early hours of the morning, right? It's probably maybe the sunlight is just starting to break over the horizon and all of this takes place and see what happens in verse number 4, chapter 6, verse number 4. It says, and the king said, who is in the court? Apparently he was so excited about this gallows that he wanted to build that he was in the courts very early. Who is in the court? Now Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king, to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's servant said unto him, behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? No context given here at all to Haman. What should be done to this person? Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight to do honor more than to myself? And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought, which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head, and let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of the one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the streets of the city, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. I feel like those words tasted terrible in his mouth later. But he thought this was, who could the king possibly want to honor more than me? He's already promoted me. He's already done all of these things. Who could the king possibly want to take care of more than I? I mean, he wasn't on the same page as the king. He wasn't in the same book as the king. The king was planning on rewarding Mordecai. And Haman thought, who else but me? I've said it already. I just can feel the pride flowing out of this guy, the arrogancy to imagine that this is the only person that the king could possibly want to award this to. So Haman gets an assignment from the king. He gives this eloquent plan, and he receives a devastating blow to his ego. But even in, I'm going to read a couple more verses here. Think about this. He said, and have one of your most noble princes go through and escort him, this person, through the kingdom. So even having Haman do this, the king wasn't bashing on Haman, but he really hated the fact that it was Mordecai. He really hated the fact that Mordecai was the one that he had to do all of this to. Look at verse number 10. It says, and the king said to Haman, make haste and take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the streets of the city, and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor. I think those words tasted horrible in his mouth I don't even think it was necessarily and so will it be done unto the man that the king wants to honor. I think it was more like, and such shall it be done to the man who the king desireth to honor. And kind of the whole way through the city, just pouting through the whole city. I mean, just seeing how much pride the guy had, I imagine he just pouted through the whole thing. And I just think of the king like, Haman, that's a great idea. That's a great way to reward somebody. Do that to Mordecai. And just the heartbreak that had to take place. So where does all of this come? Where does all of this bring us to? Haman goes through this huge, embarrassing moment, well, at least embarrassing in his eyes, where he traipses around the whole city, parading Mordecai on this horse in the royal garments, and then he goes home to his wife. And he's got to tell his wife about such a bad day that he had. Look at verse number 12. It says, and Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house, mourning and having his head covered. And Haman told Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, if Mordecai be the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him. And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains, and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. He goes home to tattle to his wife about all these woes that have befallen me, and you got to tell you I had to do this to Mordecai, and it was terrible. And then it says the wise men and his wife. Now I will say this, men, I think God has given a certain level of wisdom to wives when husbands are about to make knucklehead, bonehead moves. I think it's absolutely true. I have talked to my wife about things before, and she's like, maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe you should do something else. Zeresh tells Haman, if this has already happened, like she's almost challenging him, like, I wouldn't go up against Mordecai. I wouldn't continue on with what you're doing because you will be the one that gets destroyed in this. You're the one that is not going to fare well. As we look at all of this taking place, even just bringing the story to this point, Haman didn't listen. Haman ends up going to the second banquet because of his pride. The chamberlains show up and he's like, that's right, they're here to get me to go to this banquet. In the end, the prayers of an orphan girl made queen moved the hands of God. The pride of an unrighteous man almost stamped the death certificate for his own life. The patience of a man who rested in God was rewarded. The whole time, God is moving through the background. God's got this again and again and again, over and over and over again. God has all of this. And this is what I want you to take away. No matter how dark the world may get, you can rest in knowing that God cares, that God loves you, that God sees, and that God is still at work.